Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 787. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. This week we continue in the minefield of why starting everything you are asked to do is problematic that we began back on SPaMCAST 785. Framing the discussion is a text from a friend of the cast, which highlights those requests that you just can't say no to. Lots of rationalizations and negative impacts. We also have a visit from Susan Parente and her Not A Scrumdamentalist column. In this installment, we discuss the idea that everyone has a book in them. Saying Yes to All Work, Part 2, Thomas M. Cagley Jr., Megan E. Cagley. In the first installment of our essay, Saying Yes to All Work, I mentioned that the class exploring the topic identified, when the CEO tells me to do something, I just do it. This is a classic. And while it's rare, it does happen. Over the years, I have seen in the event that this happens, almost no one pushes back. A few hours after the podcast was posted, a longtime friend of the podcast sent me a stream of texts, adding an exclamation point to the CEO told me to do it excuse. The text formed the following story. Hi, Tom. Regarding why shouldn't we start all work on the latest podcast, the exact thing you mentioned about the CEO asking for a task happened here. An executive asked for a report, jumping the normal prioritization queue. It took several people several days to do it. While the data existed, it was not broken down the way he asked for. A team was spun up and reportedly had 20 people involved. When he heard this story, he said during an all-employee meeting, "If I'd known that it was going to take more than 15 minutes to get the answer, I would have expected someone to come back to me. Because maybe we don't need that. Or maybe come back to me with, hey, we don't have that, but here's something similar we already have." Jumping the line in the work intake process meant no triage occurred. Other work got neglected. In the end, the organization got a bit of a black eye. As step 2 in our exploration of the topic, I challenged the teams in the class to consider the consequences at an individual team and organizational level. A synthesis of the top 5 groups of answers are: 1. Work overload. At the team level, saying yes to everything can overwhelm team members, leading to stress, burnout, missed deadlines, and decreased productivity. The impacts of overload at the organizational level include losing customers due to higher costs, missed deadlines, and/or poor quality. Everyone agreed in the long run, overload would increase turnover too. 2. Priority confusion. Lack of control over work intake can result in unclear priorities. Lack of control of work intake creates a scenario where teams struggle to determine which tasks or project are most important. Less critical tasks get done at the expense of crucial ones. At an organizational level, this leads to frustration and reduced trust in teams, and the process causing the problem to get worse. 3. Effort and resource misallocation. Ineffective intake processes lead to misallocation of people and resources. Effort gets applied to the wrong work at the wrong time. This generates cost overruns and causes opportunity costs at the organizational level. This also causes trust failures. Inconsistent quality. When work intake isn't controlled, the combination of work overload, frustration, and people asking about their work will cause quality to suffer. Cutting corners. You can call it technical debt. You can call it anything you want. Cutting corners is not necessarily a good thing. Rushing through tasks due to overload or lack of prioritization can result, let's say, in subpar outcomes. Customer dissatisfaction. The inability to manage work intake means someone is always getting the short end of the stick. If your customers don't trust you or your quality, they will go somewhere else. By the way, this is why Jeremy Willits and I wrote Mastering Work Intake. Why do you take every piece of work that comes your way? I think the class concluded the right answer was not to do it. But when I asked them if the problems they described would override the behavior, the room became uncomfortably quiet. Pushing back on rationalizations for why they have to participate in destructive behavior has to start with being able to feel that the behaviors can be safely changed. Those that have safety avoid most of the problems, and those that don't have a tough road to travel. Again, this is why Jeremy Willits and I wrote the book, Mastering Work Intake. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. We look forward to the conversation. Susan Parente. I'm Not A Scrumdamentalist. Great column. I'm glad you are here this month. Susan, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast again.
Thank you. It's always great to be here.
Susan, we've had this discussion. You're an author. I'm an author. Not everybody's an author. I don't know why they are. I think this is a quote from, you. Everyone has a book inside themselves. How do you get that out? If everyone does have a book inside themselves, how do we help them get that out?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, first, it's believing that. I think I got it from somebody, and I don't remember who, but I really believe it to be true. And I'll give you an example. Dean Graziosi, I know him through like Tony Robbins. Like I do some of their like kind of mastermind things and stuff like that. Dean Graziosi has dyslexia, and he's actually written multiple books. You're like, how's a person with dyslexia write a book? And like, it's possible. So, I mean, I don't know specifically how he did it. I know he got some help, some editing help and things like that. You can do a lot of voice to text now. We have lots of software that's available for that. So that definitely helps for people who have, a disability or a challenge with that. But the idea that we all have something to contribute, we all have something to offer, something that is uniquely us, and that is something that will hugely benefit somebody else. And as we get older, I think, our experiences become very focused in certain areas and then not in others. And so I tend to read a lot of nonfiction, and I read things that I find very interesting, but are not things that I necessarily know a lot about, because I figure, let me find somebody who does know a lot about that and who's done all the work and done all the research. And so I think everybody has something to contribute, and whether it be nonfiction or fiction, I just think there's a book in everybody, and it's a matter of them believing that. I think people think you're like born an author, and I don't think that's the case. I think it's just that people who choose to write a book are maybe uniquely tackle that, and other people are afraid to.
Are they afraid to, or are they just decided that it's not, they don't have the time or space to do that?
I'd say they probably just don't think that's them. They think that you have to be some sort of brilliant scholar to write a book, but it does take time.
Well, you are, and you've written a book, therefore you must be, right?
A brilliant scholar?
Yeah.
Well, I tend to be, I was always really good in school. I always got like A's and things like that. So I think that if somebody had to guess, I would have been a good bet for she'll write a book or two. And I co-authored 2 books. I haven't written a book yet. Well, actually I have. I haven't published it yet. So I've personally found, and this is maybe something for people who are like, I don't think I could write. Writing with somebody else is, in my opinion, a lot easier. One of the reasons is that when I'm writing collaboratively with someone, there's creativity that occurs there that doesn't when I write by myself. Also, I hate to let somebody down. So if I'm working with somebody and they're like, we have this deadline, I'm going to meet that deadline because I'm not going to let that person down.
Accountability partner, in
Yeah, but
essence.
if I create a deadline for myself, I can be like, well, I'm going to miss that deadline. It's not going to impact anybody but me, which we should treat ourselves as well as we treat others, but we often don't, right? So I just know for me, it's been easier to co-author than it has been to single author. But that I think for anybody, it's easier to co-author. Would you agree, Tom, that it's easier to write with somebody than by yourself?
I've done that twice and got my name on the front of the book. I've done it a few times in written chapters. I think, and when you write chapters, it really isn't the same thing. It's like writing all by yourself. I really think it depends on the relationship. I think in both cases it was good, albeit the first time my co-author and I were arguing over multiple times, arguing over different forms of the English language. He was in Mumbai and Indian/British English, and I'm in the U.S. U.S. English. Yeah, certain words just mean exactly the opposite thing in those circumstances. Yeah. And we had screaming arguments a couple of times. I got off the phone once, and that was when it was just Skype. I got off the phone once. My wife said, "You're not having any fun. I don't know why you're doing this." The one that I'm just finishing up right now and hopefully will be out at the end of December, that went significantly better. It took a while longer than I expected. I've never written anything all by myself either. I know you have one in the can, or almost in the can. Why isn't that out yet?
Yeah, well, it's been a lot of years. So I started writing it when I started my business, which was 13 years ago. It just seems like really crazy that 13 years has gone by. It's on implementing risk management. I actually had a publisher, I had an editor, we were doing editing, and something happened in like the direction about how I was supposed to put it together, and I didn't do it the way that they wanted me to do it, and it basically has gotten to the point where it's kind of like you built a house and you need to jack up the house to redo the foundation. And that's painful. So like, it's almost like, should I just start from scratch? Like, would that not be easier than jacking up the house and rebuilding the foundation? I do have another editor now that I'm working with, a colleague of mine, and I've just been stopped by like the tremendousness of the overhaul task. But the challenge is that I believe this book to be really valuable. One of the reasons is when I was implementing risk management many years ago, probably 15 years ago, there was no book on how to do it. Even now, there's a lot more books on project risk management, but not necessarily on how. Like an applied book that says, you have to write a risk management plan, and here's a template and outline for what should be in there, how to create a risk management policy, the different procedures for risk management, and not just what like the PMBOK gives you, but how do you actually do that? How do you actually implement that? And how do you get over the hurdles and challenges? So I think it's a really valuable book, and it's not the only book that I have in me. I think I have a number of books in me. And that's one of those things that I'm hoping to get an answer to when I'm done with my sabbatical that we talked about in the last conversation we had. So I think it's really valuable. And I also think, one of my colleagues said, and you may know him. I'm trying to think of Dan Mezek. Do you know Dan Mezek?
I think so. Yes, I do.
Yeah, when he wrote his book, The Culture Game. It's an Agile book. It's about Agile culture, which is really great because, Agile is more of a mindset. Everybody thinks about it as a set of tools, and that really isn't what it is. So he said writing his book was like giving birth. And he's like, well, I'm not exactly sure what giving birth is.
I was about to say, I don't think he exactly knows, but okay.
but he has children. He's probably, more acquainted with it. I do not have children, but I chuckled at that. And he was like, especially at the end, it was like, it was a quite painful experience, but also very rewarding. And I think that kind of sums it up. I think like with all huge endeavors in life, you learn something to get through that. Like it's like climbing Mount Everest, or it's not something, and having only co-authored, and I've basically written a manuscript that hasn't been published. I can say that it is unlike other challenges. I got a master's degree, didn't really think much about it. It was pretty easy. Just take a bunch of classes. When you're done, you put a cap and gown on, you graduate, and you move on, right? A few people have said to me, "Oh, you ever want to get your PhD?" And I'm like, if somebody funded it, I'd go do it. Like, I'm really not, I don't see that as being an insurmountable thing. I started my own business without really thinking much about it. I think for 5 years, I was like, well, we'll see how this goes. And somebody walked up to me one day and said, you've had your own business for 5 years. You're using that money to pay your bills, and you don't have any debt. I think you can say you're successful with that. I don't think you can say you're just trying it out anymore. And so, to have started a business, gotten a higher degree, I'm a professor at multiple universities, like, it's like, PhD would be easy. Writing a book is a lot harder. So that's my opinion.
It's only a lot harder because you haven't done it yet. I suspect, and again, it is, for all kidding aside, I think both of us will agree that it is not the easiest thing in the world. It probably isn't the hardest thing in the world either.
I think it challenges different people in different ways. Like if I told you what my challenges were and you said what your challenges were, they would be different. But it will put you to the brink of your ability, and the getting over that is what there is to get from it. So it's not that everybody gets the same thing from it.
Isn't that true? That whole idea of going to the edge, surmounting at least something at the edge of your capacity, your capabilities, your ability, whatever word you want to use. Isn't that how people grow? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing in things like retrospectives or, the introspections? And I think that's what's hard for people. They are afraid of either failing or afraid of confronting those things that are hard for them.
Yeah, and that's why, and that I'm glad we're bringing this back for our listeners back to Agile, and that's why failure is so important in Agile. And I think you're exactly right. What happens is right before incredible success is failure. And not just one failure, many failures. My husband was listening to some motivational speeches the other day, and one of them was by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he was talking about the beginning of his career. And he had the movie Conan the Barbarian, which was like wildly successful, and it's like he was literally like made for that role. He said that when that movie came out, whoever was like the producer or whatever, they said, if we hadn't found Arnold to play that part, we would have had to make him. And before that, he had found in his career the barriers were his physique and his accent. And it turned out those ended up being his strengths. Like they appeared to be like his weaknesses, and they ended up being his strengths. So he had a lot of failure before he had success. And guess what? Michael Jordan, Albert Einstein, like I just like name anybody that is wildly successful. And I guarantee if you talk to them, they had many failures before they had successes. And we pretend like failure means we should step back and not do it, when we actually have to like get through the failure. We have to continue. You got to get through it. That's where the growth is. And it's when it seems it's worse and when it seems it's most difficult, pushing forward is where that growth resides. And that's why a lot of people don't grow into something else and don't take that leap because failure gets in the way. And failure is just a part of it.
What is it in our society that stops people from that? I mean, well, let's just...
Comfort.
Well, is it comfort, or Well, in organizations, I don't think it's always safe to do that.
Well, not only that, there's a social draw when you try to step away. And this is interesting. We were just talking before about like some social psychology things. When you try to step away and transform and bring yourself to the next level, your social group, whoever that is, either at work, personally, whatever, will pull you back to who they know you to be. So they find actually when people, like, let's say you say, you know what, I want to start my own business, and everybody you know has a salary paycheck, none of them have their own business. They'll be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? You're crazy. Like, don't do that. Why don't you just come back to the office and just do what we do? Like, why are you trying to start your own business? Well, people who start their own business, who actually create relationships with other people who have their own business, will pull them into that different space, right? So like you're not going to be very successful starting your own business if you don't have anybody in your network who also has their own business. That's my opinion. That's been a strength for me, and I've been a strength for those people who have their own business. Whereas if everybody in my professional network had a just salary job, I would have had a harder time starting my own business. So it's like, sometimes what stops you from doing that new thing is your network that just kind of wants you typecast. Like you know, Susan, you do this, keep being Susan, don't do something different. I think we underestimate the power of our networks to keep us where we're at, which isn't, I'm not saying get rid of all your friends and things like that. I'm just saying create another group, a network to support the new thing you're doing.
Yeah, social and peer pressure. I know there are positives and negatives to both, to social and peer pressure. And as someone who works with change, you can use social and peer pressure to help people change. But, if we go back to our central premise, everybody has a book in them. Where do they find people that they can say, hey, what was it like? What happened when everybody said, come on, let's all go out to the bar, and you got to get 5,000 words on a piece of paper today?
Well, there's groups for that. You can probably look on LinkedIn. I know that there are a lot of professional groups. There's even some training organizations where, take this class and we'll guide you through the process of writing a book. And I haven't used that personally, but I know people who are budding authors that I know are usually in groups where other people are also writing and writing about different things, but they use that for accountability and support. So that's valuable too. I would say a bare minimum, befriend some people who've written books, and that might seem odd, but you can literally reach out to people. People are actually a lot more inclined to do that than you would think. And even, let's say you contact 5 people that wrote books that you really like, even if only one of them gets back to you, that's still pretty awesome. Maybe you have to contact 20 people, but I do think you'll find somebody who's looking to pay it forward because they probably had somebody that helped them get to that space. I myself, and even though I've co-authored 2 books, I still am working on writing that book myself. And the funny thing about that is I believe I've got maybe 5 books in me, and I think some of them could actually be bestsellers, but I just got to get them out of me. I will say this, that's, for me personally, I think that is part of my legacy. I lost my father in January, and my dad was quite an artist and a spectacular person. He restored a 1927 Oldsmobile, which looks a lot like a Model T Ford, if anyone knows what that is. And he also restored an 1800s trolley car. And I think to myself, wow, my dad left those creations, like he's no longer with us. And I think to myself, well, what will I leave? And as a teacher, I think I've definitely helped a lot of students and help people have a better life in some way. But writing a book is a wonderful legacy. I read books that people who are long gone and they still make a difference, right? And so it's a tremendous thing if you think about purpose in life. Definitely writing a book would be a much easier way to leave a legacy than restoring an 1800s trolley car, which is quite an endeavor.
True. Two things. One is Wayne Gretzky, I believe, said that you miss, or at least you don't make, 100% of the shots that you don't take. So you actually have to pull the trigger at some point, or they're still in you, basically. The other thing is, recently I read Johanna Rothman, who is one of the people that I look up to and want to be when I grow up, wrote a book about being a nonfiction author. And it's one of the most accessible books that I've ever read. And there were a couple of things in there that I wish I'd known before I started doing that. So another piece of information that is useful. Susan, if people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. And if I don't get back to you right away, I could be on my sabbatical, but well, depends on when you reach out to me and when this gets. But you'll find me on LinkedIn, Susan Parente, and it says I'm in the DC area. So if you see that, I technically live outside the DC area. I do work in DC and New York areas, so I had to pick one. You can also email me, Parente, Parente, at S as in Sam, the number 3, -TEC, TomEdwardCharlie.com.
And we'll, of course, have that contact information in the show notes. Susan, as usual, it has been a marvelous conversation.
Absolutely. And go think about what book that you could write, that there's something unique that you have to contribute to others. And I think everybody has a book in them.
Just start getting it on paper. Then you can work on uniqueness. So got to start typing. All right. Susan, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
In We Read Saturday News, Vacanti begins Chapter 3 of Actionable Agile Metrics Volume 2 Advanced Topics in Predictability by reminding the reader a predictable process behaves in a way we expect it to. Further, a predictable process exhibits only routine variation. Remember, link in the show notes to this week's Chapter 3, Variation and Predictability in our reread, and all previous chapters of the reread. Also, link in the show notes to buy a book. FYI, Jeremy Willits and I got the authors' copies of our books this weekend, and very frankly, we are looking forward to kicking off the 2024 with a new book on the stands, Mastering Work Intake. A link in the show notes to either buy it, depending on when you're listening to it, or pre-order it on Amazon or at J. Ross Publishing. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we will feature our annual SPaMCAST panel. As always, the conversation will be rollicking. The topics will cover things like AI, working in the office, and a look into 2024. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?